Hello, travelers. My name is Thomas the Human Bard, and I'm joined today by...
Mercy the Tiefling Wizard.
Onog the Half-Orc Barbarian.
And Bean the Rock Gnome Rogue.
And we are off on a... side quest!
Feels like forever since we've done one of these.
There's a drum.
Oh.
There's a drum solo right there. We'll work on that later.
Big drum solo.
Yeah,
we're getting a drum solo from the air conditioner above our air conditioner.
Well, that's okay.
Which literally just started, which is super cool.
Well, friends, I have brought you all out on this side quest today to discuss, and then I'll add a...
Are we gonna find? We're gonna find my dad finally, like the quest that we're
right. I forgot.
the main story. Like,
No.
he's only been missing for like a few days.
To talk
but-
about,
okay.
and then I'll add a reverb sound here. The future.
Oh, divination.
Once this
Future's
baby hits
scary.
88 miles an hour. There was a big reveal just a couple of days ago at Dungeons and Dragons Celebration, I think is what the event's called. I can't be bothered to learn all these terms.
It wasn't called like the Dungeon and Dragathon or like a like a dragon dungeon race. I don't know.
The big quest, in which they revealed that they have officially begun production work on the next evolution of Dungeons and Dragons.
It's evolving.
Whatever that means.
It was very vague.
It left a lot of us wondering if this evolution would be more of like a Pokemon evolution or like a Digimon evolution, which you gotta watch
Those
out
are
for those.
very different things.
Very
which,
different.
which is very intense and incredibly temporary.
Look, you guys are saying vague. I see it as mysterious.
I do. It kind of adds a little mystery, a little mystique to the future, which I'm interested in. So I'm going to read a little condensed quote we have here that they told us about the future of Dungeons and Dragons. We have, earlier this year, we began work on the next evolution of Dungeons & Dragons. New versions of the core rulebooks, which will be coming out in 2024 to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Dungeons & Dragons. With the surveys that we've been giving out, the next evolution of the game, we're doing the best to give you the version of the game that you really want. So, we can't really say much more yet about what our plans are as we're still making them, but you're going to see more surveys like that next year. The timing is next year, so next year we will have plenty more to say about those books and what they mean for D&D. One thing, by the way, I can assure you is that these new versions of the books are going to be completely compatible with all those 5th edition products that you already own and love, and all those products that will release between now and then. So next year, we'll have more to say.
Okay.
And that last part has a lot of people wondering and speculating, what does that mean?
What's going on?
A lot of people on the internet are kind of latching onto the idea that maybe it's going to be sort of the Dungeons & Dragons 5.5
That's what
edition.
I would think.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Because they say that they're new versions of the core rule books. And I also saw some people being like, I hope they don't change anything and it's just aesthetic. And I'm like, doubt that.
I doubt it.
I think-
So if the new player's handbooks, if the new core set is compatible with 5th edition but isn't 5th edition, like what would that even remotely
Can I
mean?
can I speculate?
No, not yet. So,
Oh,
I feel...
Absolutely not.
I'll go sit in the speculation corner and I'll wait.
I just think it's really funny that they were so incredibly vague, where they were like, look, we're doing it, but also we're not going to tell you about it. Because what is more Dungeons and Dragons than basically getting like the wheel and woe answer? You know what I mean? Like, great, thank you. I've learned nothing new. I've learned there's no benefit of this to me. Yeah, I assumed you would one day make another edition. Okay, thanks for letting me know that will happen eventually, I guess. So, we wanted to start off this episode by discussing sort of our reactions to this, kind of talking about the feedback in general from the community, and then we'll move into sort of our hopes and dreams, our wishes, if we were to wish upon a star. Our cat's going crazy in the background.
Yeah, just don't worry about that. It's fine. She's just really excited about the new D&D core set.
She's been running all over the place. Is she perhaps a druid, do you think?
Probably, yeah.
Could be.
Yeah.
Or just someone who's been like true polymorph, perhaps. So, overall, the reaction that I've seen online has been like trepidatious but excited.
Aggressively confused.
Like
Yeah.
positive hesitance.
Yeah, positive hesitancy. There is sadly a kind of a history of Wizards of the Coast. I mean, you can never quite trust their next release. You never know when it's going to be a good edition or a bad edition. And I've seen a little bit of pushback on, man, I hope it's not basically just, hey, buy 5th edition again for the 6th time. Because there's been a little bit of feedback from the community where people were like, oh, I bought 5th edition, but then there were some errata updates I had to like get. So then I bought a new edition of, like, I bought a new printing of the books to get all that in. And then they printed Tasha's, which is like a lot of rules expansions, but also you still need the old books, and it doesn't really work without them. But in general, people also felt like they had to rebuy the books for D&D Beyond, or they had to rebuy them for their virtual tabletop that they use.
They're
like,
kind of pulling a Skyrim.
It is absolute agony that the fact that I have multiple in real life physical books, but because I didn't buy them in D&D Beyond when they were on sale, I just don't have access to them in the digital version.
Yeah. And so with all that, there is like a slight trepidation of like, is this really going to be something new? Or are you going to kind of try and sell us an old thing again with like some minor tweaks and be like, it's basically something new, pay full price for it, please. But I'm hopeful that it'll be something worthwhile, something new, bring some new stuff to us. What are some other reactions that you guys have had?
I am curious. I think that if you look at the direction that Wizards of the Coast seems to have sort of generally been moving with some of the other products and things that they announced, I think they're trying to sort of gather up, condense into one location all of the sort of updates and patches, so to speak, that they've put on the game since then. And it wouldn't surprise me. I this is not like I'm saying this is what it will be. I have no idea what it will be. But it wouldn't shock me if these new core rulebooks were sort of the patched version of the existing ones, where everything that they're changing about race is just already written in, where they decide which version of the many versions of the Ranger they've released they actually like and just replace it there. I would expect them to add some classes and subclasses at the very least to these books so that you are getting entirely new stuff, and that way it wouldn't surprise me if they managed to kind of spin it that it's both streamlining and condensing some of the systems and updated rules for newer players while adding additional, maybe more niche, maybe more mechanically complicated classes and subclasses for quote-unquote veteran players who want more of a challenge, because I doubt they'll market it as like advanced D&D again, because that's not very like new player friendly.
That's true.
But they also want
you'll
old
think,
players to
I'm
feel
not
like
advanced.
they're getting something new and that it isn't like D&D for babies.
Yeah.
So I bet they'll try to kind of play both of those angles, and that would be my guess as to how you would go about that.
I would love to see D&D for babies. Just like a party of all babies.
I think what I noticed that was interesting is every now and then they did use language where they were talking about like catering isn't the right word, but like keeping in mind a wider audience or keeping in mind new players. There's been like a bigger influx of D&D players than ever before. My bet is that they're just going to take things that already exist and not just reflavor them, but restructure them. Like you guys said, like with the race stuff, where they're like, oh, this is a whole new way of thinking about race. And if somebody wants to play a Dragonborn that has the normal old stats that 5th edition used to use, then you can do that, and like racial buffs and all that. But if someone's wanting to play a Dragonborn where you're not worried about like racial buffs and that's just a thing you assign on your own, and like you can do that too. I wouldn't be surprised if that is the direction they go.
Which is kind of what they just did with Tasha's.
Yeah, but I think doing a kind of overhaul where they work that into like straight up just these new core rule books.
I think it'll be about sort of shifting the default rules to those newer rules.
Closer to them.
Yeah.
Or closer, more in that direction.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot to say about the popularity, like you had said, Bean, about the popularity of 5th edition. Like, more new people are playing D right now, they're playing D&D right now than ever, the end. And so, if they were going to suddenly change the entire game, apparently this is working. Why change something that's working so well? You know what I mean? Like, you might improve it, you might update it, you might refine it, but I think it makes a lot of sense to capitalize on, wow, this edition is our most successful edition we've ever made. Let's keep doing basically this, like more of it, because if we do a big risk and say, actually, we're going to overhaul the entire mechanical systems, you don't know if that will keep bringing people in or not.
To go back to what Bean was talking about, when they were saying, like, oh yeah, we listened to all of like the customer feedback and stuff from our
quizzes,
surveys,
the surveys and stuff. I understand and I know how important it is to get customer feedback for things like that, but I was forcibly drawn back to like the Simpsons like kids focus group.
Oh yeah, the episode with the focus group.
With the focus group where the guy is just like, hey, do you want this? And like I've most recently seen it in a D&D campaign meme where it's like the DM is like, hey, all right guys, do you want a serious campaign with like low magic, or do you want a really powerful campaign with amazing magical items? And the kids just go, yeah. And he's like, you want a serious campaign with low magic but high magic? Yeah. And it's just like, what a lot of the times people aren't going to know what they want. It's like,
that's
totally
true.
And not to say that like you don't know what you want, but it's
interesting
just
that there is always been a history of that with things like the famous like Coca-Cola New Coke formula, where it's like updating the Coca-Cola formula to a different one, and then people felt so betrayed because they were like, we didn't ask for this, like, please don't change it. But then there's also things like I play the game Destiny a lot, and between Destiny 1 and Destiny 2, they made an attempt to really broaden the game out to more new players, more casual players who were like the more mainstream gaming market, and in so doing took away most of the things that the really hardcore players had been interested in and had stayed around for years. And so then it brought in a lot of people who were all interested in playing the game, and then they all got tired of the game because they were just mainstream players who were just going to now go play the next game that came out. And the main player base who had stuck around for years and years and years didn't have any of those things they used to gravitate towards, and they also started to now leave because all those things were gone. And the Destiny 2 team had to hard pivot and completely redesign the entire game as it was still going, basically, and reverse course on a lot of things and add stuff back in they had taken away, where they had originally said, hey, we realize everybody wants this, we're going to change it, and then they realized that was a mistake.
And then they realized no one wanted that.
No one wanted it. So then they
back.
came out with another blog saying, ooh, actually we realized no one wants that, we're changing it back, and everyone was happy.
I am inclined to be really optimistic, honestly, at least at this point, in terms of the content of the core rules. I feel like sometimes, specifically in the culture of TTRPGs and gaming in general, I don't think it's like a hot new take from me that there can be some broy gatekeeping
For sure.
that goes on. And whenever I see people being like, oh, well, I don't want them to just dumb it down for all these new kids who just want to start playing D&D. And it's like, they're not, based on just the way that D&D works and the way that Wizards of the Coast has consistently over the last several years approached making new content for D&D, they're always adding more and more and more content and options that are compatible with one another to give more and more people options so that you can play it any way that you want to play it. And that's one of the coolest things about TTRPGs and D&D specifically, is that Wizards of the Coast themselves, written into the core rule books, is, but change whatever you want, it's your game. And like, that's beautiful and that's cool. There is, I think, a 0% chance that the core rulebooks are going to come out and it's going to say, now you can only be a champion fighter or a elf ranger and spells were too complicated. It's for babies now. That's literally not going to happen.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
any streamlining or simplification that happens, I think there is a lot of room in 5th edition for clunky, overly complicated systems to be streamlined, and streamlining is not dumbing down. And I think that a lot of the sort of, oh no, they're gonna dumb it down, I think that's just broy gatekeeping and not like a real thing that's
Yeah.
gonna happen in this game specifically. It can happen. I don't think that's what Wizards is doing.
I mean, if anything, the spells will just get more complicated. But
That seems to be the direction they always go.
So, interestingly enough, I think that it's a really telling story. Like I had mentioned with the company that makes Destiny, Bungie. After they made Destiny 2 and they had to reverse a bunch of their decisions and completely kind of remake the game, they kept some of the stuff that they had changed for the wider audience because that stuff also like just was better. Things like putting a story in the game that people can understand. Like, that wasn't a bad idea. And that wasn't dumbing the game down. And that was
removing
actually
some parts
better.
of it that were just a slog and weren't fun for anybody who was playing. Yeah.
But you do have to definitely keep keep the core, keep what brings people back to the game. As long as that stays there, you can always update and refine other things that work or don't work based on the system. But you have to keep that magic that's brought people to it. And I think one of the big points for that with D&D has been in 5th edition, the ease of interaction of the player with the system of the game, i.e., for example, D20s and advantage disadvantage.
Oh yeah.
Like bounded accuracy stuff in D&D. After trying out some other kinds of role-playing games and seeing like how much math I have to do, it can be interesting, but it's not necessarily better. And it allows a lot of people to try D&D for the first time as their first role-playing game and say, oh, I understand this. This is simple enough for me to follow, and I don't get bogged down by it. And I think that kind of a core mechanic to the game would that's something they should never change. Once they brought in advantage and disadvantage and the kind of bounded accuracy D20 system, man, they struck gold with that. And I think that's been one of the big keys to the success of D&D, because it's easy to explain to your friend how to start playing.
It's so iconic and foundational to it, too.
Now it is, yeah.
You couldn't risk taking out that cornerstone.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Well, I think that streamlining and simplification, you use the word refining, Thomas, which I think is a really good way of putting it. I think that it is good, and I think that it should happen, and that, the idea of saying, oh, you get to choose, if you want to use a new system or an old one, I think it's just, making sure that that's just done well, and like you said, not losing the parts of it that are beloved.
So, let's sneak in here a little bit about what else they talked about. So, specifically, they mentioned that they're going to be adding a bunch of new and returning settings to 5th edition in the coming years. They said they're going to have a few settings that are fan favorites that will be returning to the game, as well as some brand new ones that they've been working on. I've seen a lot of predictions online about what those might be. Some fan favorites like Dark Sun and Spelljammer. Those seem interesting, and I'm excited to see what they do with those, things like Dragonlance and Greyhawk.
Isn't this the first time in 15 years that they're adding new settings or something like that?
So they said that, yeah, it's the first time since Eberron in 2004 that they added a new setting to D&D, which I would like to take issue with,
because they have Wildemount.
Well, they've added Wildemount, and they've also added the Magic the Gathering crossover books. Well, not just Innistrad, but they've actually released official books for
Ravnica. Theros.
Yeah, for Ravnica and Theros, and I think those are the only ones.
Yeah, which is interesting.
That's a weird claim then.
Yeah. But they might mean entirely new first-party IPs, right?
They hadn't been in anything before, but yeah.
I guess.
Original
but it is
content.
still kind of odd, yeah.
It is interesting. And then the other major announcement being this holiday or next holiday. One of the upcoming holidays, they're releasing a holiday gift pack, which will be Tasha's Hideous Cauldron of Terrible Laughter Everything, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and a new book called Mordenkainen's
Those monsters.
Manual of Monsters?
Mordekainen's, we can't call it the Monster Manual.
Yeah,
Magnificent
if I
Monster
remember correctly.
Mansion.
Mordekainen's Magnificent Monstrous Mansion. Yes. In which they said was a huge collection of monster stat blocks and race options, player race options for D&D, a lot of which have been printed before. They're gathering them all up in one book. But also they did say some will be new and a lot of them will be updated. So they'll have changed how some of the stat blocks work. They talked a little bit about that with some refining of things like NPC stat blocks to make them faster to run. And that sounds really interesting to me.
One of the things that stood out to me the most that they mentioned was they are removing spell slots from NPC stat blocks.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I was sort of like half listening at that. I just had like clocked out for a second. I was like checking my phone, and they were like, "We're removing spell slots," and I was like, "From D&D?"
And I was like, no, it's from the NPCs, from the NPCs.
Which
I had to reassure him before he had a heart attack.
as a forever DM is I'm very grateful, and I hope it just streamlines it, because having to remember, okay, this 8th level wizard, or this like challenge rating 8 wizard has cast 3 3rd level spells, and this challenge rating 20 mage has cast 4. I get combat fatigue a lot, and so
I thought that was a really good idea.
That's why I only run goblins.
Yeah, I liked that announcement. I thought that was a good idea. I know that with that book specifically, that some people were like, but I already have all the other books that all those
Like
things are
Volo's
in. Why are you
Guide.
making me buy it again? So I don't have a lot of setting specific books. I have like Tasha's and things like that already, but I don't own most of the setting specific books. And so I'm super interested in that one where I can get all the races and monsters that were in those without having to buy like 50 other
Each of
setting
those
books.
Yeah, because there's like in almost every adventure they release, like the Frost Maiden, Rime of the Frost Maiden, they have certain unique monster stat blocks for those settings, and it's possible those will get added into this book as a collection of all of those creatures that they've made in one place, which would be really nice.
One thing that they talked about as well, I believe they were talking about it for that book, is that they're alphabetizing the monsters in a more useful way. So it's not like all the demons are under the D section regardless of what their name is. It's just like everything is alphabetized individually, which I would assume will probably carry over to the new core rule books, which makes me think they're just going to be doing a lot of kind of like basic user-friendly stuff like that.
I think that's fair. Do you think they'll do stuff like dragon comma green, or will it be green dragon is in the G section but red dragon's in the R section?
I feel like they're going to like green dragon, because I think they're just trying to be like, when you say it, that's what you look up.
We'll
So
see.
here's the thing, though. Think about how they have the spells organized, like in the player's handbook.
True,
where they do it like by level, but then they also do it alphabetically, and then they also do it by
Well, they have the player character caster lists by level, but the whole thing is alphabetically, so it's actually really hard to navigate.
What I'm saying is they might in the back have a glossary
have a multiple
that's
kind
like,
of appendices.
here's
of like,
all the demons.
Yeah.
Here's all the
Here are
dragons.
fiends. Here are
that
dragons.
would be useful.
Hey, wizards, if you weren't planning on that, that was a good idea. You should.
Hey,
could
you
look
should
up-
steal this idea.
You could index it by like creature type. So then you go to the fiends
That's
section,
smart.
and it'll say, page 355.
if
It
you
begins
have-
with an F. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're needing to like look it up by creature type, you can go to that like little index glossary in
That's
the
a
back.
great idea.
That would be smart, yeah.
So I'm actually curious. So on the idea of like, oh, it's all alphabetized, and like, oh, it's all the stuff. Here's kind of a thought I had on that, because some people were like, well, if I have all the books, then why would I need this one? Totally true. No one's forcing you to buy it. But also, you have all the books. You've been having to bring all those books with you to D&D. And if the thought is, oh, the alphabetizing will make it easier to flip through, I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. You might also only have to then bring, instead of like 9 books, you might only have to be bringing like 2 or 3.
That's a good point.
I just rip the pages out and bring them with me individual.
Oh, no.
How dare you?
But like, depending on the kind of DM that you are, that might be something that you're really into.
That
That's a good
convenience
point.
factor is huge.
Yeah, convenience factor is a really big deal, and being able to say, I just have like the basically the the player handbook, the dungeon master guide, and the monster manual, which I know they'll be different than that. But essentially, it's just like, I've got the 3 books, and they're so much easier to flip through and so much more comprehensive. I'm a 100% improv DM, because one, it's fun, but also because it's really hard for me to wrap my brain around how the books work. And it's really hard for me. It interrupts the flow of the gameplay for me to have to like get the books out and try to understand what's going on, because they're not presented in a way that's like convenient for my brain to think about. But if they did come out with books where it was so much easier for me to exactly know how to look up the information I'm trying to get, that would be a game changer for me.
I know that's been a big deal with, I mean, I've seen a lot of people responding online. They've committed to, so far in 5th edition, this like, they call it, I'm trying to remember, they call it like plain text or something like that, where instead of using things like simple bullet lists and keywords that always have the same meaning, everything is written out in like prose English, which is flavorful and interesting to read, but can make there be a lot of trouble with getting the information you want quickly and easily. Because in a book that's just the information given to you in specific formats, it's faster to get that information and to use it while running a game. That's why people love things like tables, like random tables for rolling and stuff like that. But
you just roll the dice and you go. Yeah.
To have to just like look through paragraphs in a chapter to be like, which paragraph mentioned traps again? That can be a hassle. It definitely provides the books with a certain like flavor and vibe to them, which I think is a big part of them. But I think there is a better mix of those things than where we're at now, which I would hope that these new editions might touch on a bit. Like you were saying, Bean, give me easier ways to look up what I want during a session so that I don't have to be like, oh, what's that, guys, and flip through 20 pages trying to find a specific paragraph heading I'm looking for.
Yeah, you might be, and maybe you just decide you don't want the book, but you might be thinking now, like, why would I want that? And perhaps when it comes out, you're like, oh my gosh, great, I don't have to bring a ton of books with me, and it's so comprehensive to read. It might, be something that surprises you.
I've always wanted, and maybe this is like a collector's edition thing they could do one day, like tabs on the pages.
Oh, yeah.
So that you can, like, flip through and like grab one of the tabs that says
especially
like traps.
Because they are basically encyclopedias.
They're basically encyclopedias.
I kind of just want to go through and do that to my D&D books now that I have.
Well, you can put in homemade tabs.
Dang,
so I'm saying build that in, baby.
But I think, Thomas, you're describing like when you have a fancy Bible and it has the
or like encyclopedias, yeah.
Yeah, like it's got the little thumb tabs like in the gold side.
Yeah. I think that would be very useful, especially if you do stuff like color code them and have little, like, you do more user-friendly and less sort of verisimilitude, like make it seem like a tome that's written by hand and make it a little bit more like an encyclopedia meant to run a game.
Sure.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of what I expect to see and what I would want to see in my wildest dreams.
Yeah, sure.
With these new books and what they'll entail. I am, like I've kind of said, I'm expecting it to be the core rule books written in ways where areas where people are constantly getting confused and tweeting at Jeremy Crawford 20 times a day being like, what does this mean? This is contradictory. I would assume they're going to try and address as many of those as they can and just add clarification and streamline, remove confusing language, remove places where a word is used for flavor that is also a mechanical word, which they try not to do, but they slip through sometimes. And obviously, I think they're going to be updating everything about race like they have already been doing. Like they put an optionally in Tasha's. I think that's going to become the default in the new core rule books. In terms of them being backwards compatible, I mean, I would expect there to be a paragraph in there that's sort of like, but you can do it the old way if you want. Like, well, okay, whatever.
Sure.
Which doesn't really mean anything.
I think that just means backwards compatibility implies a lot more that the basis of the system will still function.
Yeah, well, and specifically that it will still work with your setting books. I think that's really important, that it still works with all of your D&D 5th edition setting books. I also would expect them to add new classes, new subclasses, new items to make it feel worth your while, even if you already have all the old stuff. And I bet in the way that they were talking about, when they talked about removing spell slots from NPC spellcasters, monster spellcasters, I was like, oh, that is such a good idea. Tracking spell slots sucks. And it made me think about spell slots in general for player characters. And this is one of those things that I highly doubt they will. I would love to be surprised. I doubt they'll mess with it because, like Thomas was saying, I think this might be too much of an overhaul for what it seems like they're trying to do or what they would want to risk right now. I could be wrong about that. But right now, I have been playing both Divinity Original Sin 2 and the
Baldur's Gate 3.
Baldur's Gate 3 early access. And it's been really interesting to switch between the two because they're made by the same studio, but Baldur's Gate 3 is D&D. Like, it uses the same system, the same mechanics. It's just a video game. And it is officially, like, in conjunction with Wizards. And switching between the two games that are basically the same game, but one of them uses D&D's mechanics exactly, has highlighted a lot of its sort of strengths and weaknesses for me to go back and forth in that short time. And one of those things is spell slots in general, but I think that applies more broadly to class abilities that have limited refresh, where it's like once every short rest, once every long rest. Because in games in general, you want to make your mechanics function in a way that encourages the players to play the game, to use the tools that you've given them to be active participants. Like, Doom is a classic great example where killing demons heals you, so you want to just be a tank and charge through and kill all the demons and not hide around a pillar while you heal. So the mechanics make you play the game the way it wants you to.
Yeah.
In Dungeons and Dragons, I personally find, and I'm sure this doesn't apply to everyone, but I also know that I'm not the only person in the world who finds that I fall into that sort of mentality of like when you don't ever use your health potions in a video game because what if you need it more later? Where because there is so much less structure to a game of Dungeons and Dragons, I can't even track like, oh, I can see the sun moving through the sky and every night in this video game I take a long rest or whatever. There isn't like that sort of external way to track, and so I don't know how many more fights or how many more encounters I'm going to have before I take a long rest. So then I'm always really precious with my spell slots, and I'm really precious with my like long rest and short rest abilities, and I end up not using them fully. Like, I'm never out of them by the time I rest because I'm worried about using them up, which to me seems like there's room for improvement there.
It's like the game's incentivizing you to not do your
to not
cool
play
stuff.
the game. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of room for
yeah.
improvement there when the goal of D&D is to live that power fantasy, but then I'm scared to use any of my powers. I think that could get worked on. And I think that the way they do it in Divinity, it's more that like you just have a certain number of action points every round, and the big spell will take all my action points, and I can't use it again for 10 minutes. Not until tomorrow, not I only have 3 slots. I'll just have to wait a few minutes, but it will come back. And for me, I find that when I'm playing Divinity, I use all my big cool stuff as often as I can. And when I'm playing Baldur's Gate, it's like when I'm playing D&D and I'm super precious with my spell slots and I'm bummed out when I see that I'm out. And I'm just out. Like, and if other people don't need a short rest yet, but I kind of need one. And it's just...
Yeah, definitely.
There's just... I wish that system would get an overhaul. I know not everyone will agree with me on that, but I think for my play style, I often find that system isn't, like, ideal for me.
I think that's really interesting.
So, Mercy, I absolutely feel you. I have such item anxiety. Every save of Morrowind I've ever played, the first real big town you come to ends up being just full because even individual items, not just your main character, had limited carrying capacity because you can only shove so much inside of a wooden crate, right? Mm-hmm. Literally every crate in, I think it's Balmora, every crate in that town is full of my spells and potions because I refuse to use them because, quote unquote, what if I need it later?
Yeah.
However, so therefore I'm absolutely on your side. However, what you've sort of described, one of the things that I think that they tried to solve for that problem is what they did in 4th edition.
Oh.
Because
the per encounter.
I'm not very familiar with 4th edition
because they didn't have and that's the thing, everybody kind of felt like a wizard because everyone kind of had all magical abilities and stuff. Mm-hmm. You had a normal weapon attack you could use, but why would you ever use it? Because you have a infinite use ability that is also a weapon attack but has an extra effect tagged on, kind of a thing.
Sure.
So there was at will abilities, and then there was per encounter abilities, and then there were per day abilities. and things like that. And so basically at-will abilities are like the cantrips, current cantrips in 5th edition. You can just do them as much as you want. Have fun. Go ham. And then there were abilities that it was just literally every time you rolled initiative, you could only use it once. But it was every time you rolled initiative. So it's like, smoke them while you got them. I played as one might guess, I played a barbarian back in the day. And it was like a big area attack and something like that like healed me up a lot. So it was just like, okay, I'm going to end this fight real quick. And if we start another fight, I'm not punished for having used this ability because I immediately get it back because it's per encounter. And then there were per day abilities where those are what we normally know as like the current setup, where it's just you just use it once per day. It's been a really long time, and I only played one campaign in 4th edition, but that's how I basically remember it working.
It was very
it's very interesting that like that anxiety is probably what directly led to that design.
Definitely, yeah.
And then nobody liked it. So
I remember a lot of the
this.
complaints ended up being that, like you had mentioned, Onag, it kind
Everyone's
of just made everyone feel the same, which is interesting because it's like, sure, you as a barbarian are using your smash ability, which says deal force damage in a sphere around you with your great axe as you slam it into the ground. But my wizard just used their fireball ability, which is almost word for word the same and uses the same amount of action points, except it deals fire damage. So isn't my barbarian just casting a spell at that point? And it was like everyone, the players, the feedback was that everything kind of just felt the same but given different names.
That sounds to me though more like a problem, and I could be wrong because I haven't played 4th edition, so I might be misunderstanding, but that sounds to me like more of a problem with the specific abilities that were written and less with that form of an economy.
Oh yeah, for
because
sure.
it doesn't feel like, because if as a warlock my spell slots come back on a short, like my whatever shatter comes back on a short rest, and as a fighter your riposte comes back on a short rest, that doesn't feel like, oh, so I'm just a sword warlock, like
Yeah.
because
except for the sword warlocks,
different. Except for the sword
definitely
warlocks, but because that's just a completely different thing.
Yeah, it had to do though with that when you gave everyone the same resources, it felt like they were the same
Instead
as
of
each
having
other.
a separate spell slots.
Yeah, because spell slots
mechanic.
imply this magical resource that is unique to you if you are a spellcaster.
That's interesting.
So I'm not trying to design 4th edition or anything, but I'm just saying that was some of the feedback that people had
that's
given.
what people were complaining
Which,
about.
if they moved in that direction, they would have to definitely keep in mind that
Some
was
way
the
to
negative
differentiate,
feedback. So they'd have to, if they wanted to do something like streamline the player experience to incentivize you to use your abilities, they'd have to find a way to keep that feedback in mind and not make it everyone feel the same, like everyone's some kind of caster. Even though in 5th edition everyone is basically some kind of caster, it's so hard to not have magic in D&D.
Yeah, like you can't even be a barbarian and not have magic. I have magic.
To kind of wrap up like my last big thought that I had about this.
Your last big thought
My
ever.
last big thought. I've got
Ever.
one brain cell
Only-
left, everybody.
Only small thoughts from here on out.
So just to kind of close that up, that's a really good point. So maybe if they do redo spell slots, they would need to come up with a different streamlined system for spells than for martial abilities, just for that, so that it feels different, which is an interesting idea. But then the other big thing, Onag, that you reminded me of in bringing that up about 4th edition was that I don't like that everyone is magic. Because I like to play casters a lot, but then sometimes I specifically want to be a fighter in this like gritty, low magic world, and I'm like not allowed, I'm not allowed to not know
so
how to
hard
make
in
fire
5th
shoot out of my
edition.
hands,
Yeah.
and that is annoying to me. I want to see more low magic options, because not having low magic options also limits DMs in what settings they can create.
Well,
Yeah, definitely.
interestingly enough, if one of the future settings we go to is Dark Sun, if I remember specifically, like that's their whole thing, is that like only like 5 people have magic, or something like that. Like it's
Dark Sun is, like,
it's a whole
hyper low
thing.
magic, yeah.
Guess
It's
everyone's a
super low
champion
magic.
fighter.
Like metal as a resource is super rare. So like nobody's running around in plate armor. So like it's basically Mad Max Fallout, but it's D&D.
But it's D&D, yeah. So Onog, I'm interested. What is your like wish upon a star dream for what they might do with this update? If you could have it be anything your heart's desire, what would you have it be?
one of the things that I have missed the most is a actual planned out, like, set up magic item crafting system. And like, because one of the cool things about our campaign is that, like, we basically robbed a platinum mine, or something like that, and we had infinite money, and so we were able to buy and customize whatever magic items we wanted. And while you can homebrew something like that, the fact that it's not inherent in the system, like, one of the things I wanted to bring up when we were talking about the alphabetizing the monsters is I desperately need them to unalphabetize the magic items in the Dungeon Master's guide, because that it is super obtuse to be like, oh, is it a blade of sharpness or is it a sword of sharpness? Like, and trying to figure out where the sword of sharpness is. Like,
is it the staff of jumping or the jumping staff?
Is it the staff of jumping or the jumping staff? Like, this is useless garbage to me. But if they set it up where it's like, here's the magical ability of sharpness, you can add this to weapons that deal slashing damage, stuff like that, because that's how it used to be presented. And to be able to craft and customize, because one of the in my honest opinion, one of the greatest failings of 5th edition is that literally the only person who can rules as written, like functionally with actual set forth rules in a feasible amount of effort make magic items are artificers. And while it's like cool because that's their whole thing, it's one of the things where it's just like, oh, just because a magic item is more expensive, it takes longer. But that doesn't take into account the fact that the reason it's more expensive is just because the materials are rarer, not because they are harder to work with. And so, like, the current crafting system, I would never use it. I would never recommend anyone use it. But if there was a actual overhaul of magical crafting system where you could customize something, where you could make something sharp and +1 or +2, you could build up and develop your magic items, and then they would feel like yours. Because that's the thing, is like, if I find a Holy Avenger, it's not really mine. It's a Holy Avenger. It does what Holy Avengers do. But if there was some level of customization where it's like, so this is my like, literally, this is my fish hook, is one of the magic items that I made, and it was a spear, and it was a spear of returning that had like a magical chain attached to it. And because I had spent so much time with that character, and like the reason I made that magic weapon, and it was getting stronger over the session, because that was just kind of inherent in the rules that you could do something like that. And that's the thing, is like, the way the magic items are set up now, it's just, oh, I got a sword, and then I got a stronger, better sword, so I'll just sell that old sword. There doesn't feel like individual progression, it just feels like replacements.
Yeah, definitely. I think it would be great if there was a built-in system by which my longsword that I begin the campaign with, if I want it to be, could be the longsword I finish the campaign with, but now it's a flame tongue longsword that also has an enchantment on it that makes it so I can, like, that has all these abilities that I've put onto it over time as I've developed. Made it unique to me. Yeah.
And some of them can be homebrew, but most of them are just in the rules as written.
Yeah, it can have rules for homebrewing your own abilities, of like guidelines on the types and abilities they can have.
Mm-hmm. Also, if you're not going to do that, then give magic weapons, make more than just swords. Because that's the most aggravating thing. It's like, oh, I want my character to wield a warhammer. What kind of magical warhammers can I have? There are 3. There's the magic warhammer of warning, and then there's the super legendary rare ones that I don't have the ability to get.
Hammer just goes bonk.
Hammer
what else
bonk.
You need it to do?
Sometime I want hammer to go explode.
Onog, 2 things that I remember being disappointed by when I was first getting into D&D.
I thought you already had all your big thoughts.
These are small thoughts. I remember being really bummed out when I saw that the enchanter wizard didn't mean I could enchant magical items. That didn't
It just meant that you could mind
make
control people.
things magical, and I was disappointed that the artificer was so limited in what kind of magical items they could make.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would love to see that.
Yeah,
I think that'd be
I'm
awesome.
all in with you there, Onog. I want to talk about something that I demand. I need the next edition to look, Wizards of the Coast, you already make Magic the Gathering. You know how to do this. To use a functional system of evergreen keywords to convey information quickly, succinctly, and easily. Because when I read a Magic the Gathering card that has Trample, Lifelink, and Death Touch, I just know what it does. Like,
And if you don't, you can play the core set, and it explains all of those things.
Yeah, you can play a core set. It will explain those things to you. I can also look them up individually at any point. Of course, I can look up what does Death Touch mean. But from that point on, it can just say Death Touch. It doesn't need to say the full description of Death Touch every time on every card. And man, I wish D&D had more of that, where my abilities, my spells, my magic items can just use keywords I can understand that are simple. They have some status effects that are all kind of like that, but even those are sort of unreliable sometimes, because guess what? Paralyzed and incapacitated and unconscious are all different
What
from
does
each
immune
other.
to poison mean? Poison damage or the poison condition?
Why? Yeah, does poisoned mean the damage
If
type?
it's venomous, does it do poison damage?
Please.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, too, because they do sort of, and that's a big sort of, have that in the monster manual blocks with things like keen senses and pack tactics.
But they're never quite the same.
But except the problem is, from creature to creature, they are different, because keen senses can mean, oh, this creature can see really well, or it can hear really well, or it can smell really well. Also,
Or
I want
a
to know
combination.
how I, if I were a druid and somehow gained keen senses by transforming into these various animals, what is the difference between a perception check that is using my sight or a perception check that is using my sound or smell? Because that is very obtuse in the rules, where it's just like, well, I roll with advantage when I'm using my smell, so I rolled a natural 20. Yeah, but you didn't see anything because you're only using your smell. So you smell all of this information. And it's like, what does that mean?
I think that like Wizards gets nervous about making a big bullet pointy glossary, indexy, dictionary, encyclopedia type thing, because it seems so nerdy is not the right way of putting it, but it seems so uninviting, right?
That's true. It can feel academic.
It feels really academic, and especially if you're like, oh, D&D, what's this? And you open a book, you would just be like, and you'd be like, never mind.
No, we need
For
pretty
sure.
pictures. Pretty pictures.
But
So-
but just what I'm saying is, though, I would love that. Like, if the thing is, at first, I know that Bean would look at it and hate it. But over time, no, I mean it. When I play Magic the Gathering, my decks are designed off of, like, I will look at a card, and if it has too many words on it, I don't include it, because I just don't like bothering to read that many words.
Listen, she's a bean. She doesn't even have eyes. What do you want from her?
What do you want
can't
from me?
read.
She's just a little bean.
My brain is made of Pinto.
But anyways, you were saying?
But what I'm getting at, though, is the ability when you're the DM or another player and you're like, wait, what does your ability do? What is this going on? And you have to flip through like 20 different books to try to find, I mean, we've kind of all said this over and over again, but to find the paragraph where it kind of mentions this and it's like, well, in this case it means that, but in that, if it was just a word and you're like, oh, I don't know what diligence means, hold on, because you're like, you can say, no, my character has diligence, and you go, hold on, and you open the thing and you look up qualifiers, and then diligence says it does this exact thing. That would happen so much faster. And you just be able to be like,
Exactly.
oh, it's this, that means that. You're right, you do have diligence.
Which book is that rule in?
No, yeah, it's just all there.
Well,
Yeah.
And I think that it's, I can understand why they might be hesitant to do that. But I think if we had something like that, where there was a guide to how to use the guide, that would be helpful.
Well, and that would certainly resolve issues like I remember a couple years ago there was the conflict was raging of like, when elves use their meditation ability, are they conscious of the world around them? And people were constantly arguing. It's like, no, because you're not asleep, you're conscious. And everyone was like, no, but you are dreaming and meditating, so you're not conscious. And if there was that thing where it's like, while sleeping, you are still diligent, which means X, Y, and Z, that you are still conscious. That would resolve that issue.
Perception checks and yeah. Sure. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that kind of a system would be great for an update. I don't care if they literally keep all the rest of the core rulebooks the exact same, but they just make it consistent and use keywords so that I can always rely on what it says. That would be enough for me. But my second point that I want to make about what I hope for in the future is something that even we've touched on a little bit already, in that there is these two audiences of D&D. There is the kind of wide mainstream audience, and there's the core who's stayed around forever, and both want slightly different things out of the game. I also know that there are some statistics about players, the majority of players never play a character past level 10 or something along those lines. Like never in their entire career. Maybe as like a funny one-off, they'll play a level 20 character just for one session, but most campaigns that people run end before level 10.
Yeah.
And so all of the higher end content doesn't ever come into play. And Wizards has even like not made that much high end level content because they know people don't play in higher level games, which then creates a feedback loop because people don't play high level games because there's no content made for it, and there's no content made for it because no one plays the high level games.
I mean, for a game called Dungeons and Dragons, I have fought 2 dragons in the years this game has been out.
I think it would be great if, as a broad sort of system, which would still work with all the functional rules and everything they print, from levels 1 to 10, you're playing beginner Dungeons and Dragons. You can just call it normal. You don't have to call it beginner, but you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. And then from levels 10 to 20, you're playing advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
You got that hardcore.
Okay.
And after level 10, the game assumes that you understand it enough to start challenging you, the player, with complexity. But before level 10, the goal is to be simple and easy. So post level 10, all of a sudden it opens up into really complicated multi-classing and feats and abilities and prestige classes. But before level 10, it's much more reliant on simple, direct messaging and like easy to comprehend rules that can still lead to interesting play, because I think 5th edition does a lot of that now. But those people who stick around from edition to edition want to play more in that complicated space. And so if you have it that they can start D&D in that space, I think they've talked about this before, having a rules section saying, if you want to play advanced Dungeons and Dragons, start your characters at level 10.
Yeah.
And here are rules for how to do that. Here is how much XP you have. Here is how much gold you start with. Here is these, so that you understand everyone will start at level 10 because we want to play advanced D&D where we're going to be fighting really complicated encounters. We're going to be having really nitty-gritty stuff. We're going to be doing more math than you play from levels 1 to 10. But you can also smoothly transition over from level 9 to level 11 because it just is this increasing level of complexity. It's not a literal rule change. Like, it doesn't suddenly change the system. I think, though, that level 10 should be that hard line where if you want to introduce your friend to D&D, you play from levels 1 to 7. And it's like, oh, well, post level 7, it starts to get really complicated. If you guys have had fun playing D&D and you want to play more and you want to get more into it, let's keep playing and you'll see how it can become more interesting and nuanced post the early game.
Well, that just made me think about some things that I would also like to see more support for, and I think we've all talked about this amongst ourselves just as we've played, more support for starting at higher levels, because a lot of people do, like, who've played early levels enough times where they're like, give me the cool abilities.
Start me at level 3, why not?
And specifically, it's really difficult, and this even applies to if you aren't starting at a higher level, but just giving the DM and the player some guidance for progressing through the levels. Roughly how many encounters, how many sessions should I be leveling up? Roughly how many new spells should my wizard be encountering in the world in order to be, like, accurately kind of leveled with the other classes? and roughly how much gold should they have starting at a higher level, just things like that. When should they be getting magic items of different rarities, things like that, that there isn't a lot of like clear, direct, easy to
There's
find
been some
rules
guidance,
about.
but it's hard to find.
Yeah, and a lot of it you really can't find as much as you would like. I know as someone who likes to play Wizards, that's really frustrating a lot, especially if you and your DM have a different idea maybe of like, I mean, wouldn't I have found more than that? And it's like, well, this is a low magic setting. And it's like, okay, well, then is being a wizard a bad idea? Like, it's just some clear guidance about that would also make it then easier to do things. Like, you can't have rules for starting at level 10 unless you add systems like that.
Definitely.
Well,
Yeah, I agree.
And that's a very interesting note to go on, too, because as we've talked about on this very podcast before, there are guidelines for like how many encounters, how much experience should you be getting a day in campaign and things like that. And we collectively as a unit just all looked at that page and just went, nah, we're not going to do that.
This sounds made up.
This sounds stupid. I have also remembered one of the things that was going to be on my list.
Oh, well, let me kind of wrap up my thing real quick here.
Let you wrap it up. But yeah.
So, as a kind of final big thought for me, to combine my two ideas here with a functional evergreen keyword system and a fun split in the game between kind of normal and advanced Dungeons & Dragons, where the higher tiers of play are officially aimed at that core audience. Bean, you talked about this with reading cards, and Onang, you talked about this with the core sets of Magic the Gathering. In Magic the Gathering, a lot of cards that have something like menace, a keyword on them, will have reminder text that says this creature can only be blocked by 2 or more creatures. So it describes to you exactly what menace means.
Reading the card explains the card.
From levels 1 to 10, all of your class features, all of your magic items you should be getting at those levels, I think would have that reminder text in them because you need to learn it. You haven't learned it yet. Your elf is diligent. That means they have this. It tells you that at first level. But at 11th level, the encounters, the monster stat blocks, the things that assume you are playing at 11th level and know what you're doing, now just say, the elf is diligent. And it assumes by this point you know what diligent means. And there's that smooth transition where it on-ramps you into these ideas. It presents them to you where you go, oh, wait, what does burly mean for my barbarian? Okay, burly means this. Okay, got it. Because it tells me in my level 2 ability, burly. But in my level 10 ability, when it mentions burly, it doesn't do the reminder text again. It just says burly. And now I've built on that knowledge base I've created before. And when I fight a challenge rating 15 monster, it can just say burly. And it's challenge rating 15. It assumes I know what that is. We're a level 15 party at this point. We should know what burly means. Yeah.
Definitely.
That would be my dream, my pipe dream for the next edition here. Onag, you said you had another thing on your list you remembered.
I had remembered one of the things on my list. So I find it very interesting that everyone else is like, I like it when this thing gets streamlined and has been simplified. And I'm like, make it weird and more complicated. But one of the things, and I think I talked about this like literally last week or two episodes ago, where it's just like, have vulnerability and like resistances like mean more than what they currently mean.
Yes.
Like, because one of the things, like, vulnerability is a concept in Dungeons and Dragons many people may not have come across because it's used in like 4 things. You know?
Yeah.
It's like skeletons, earth elementals,
And the barbecue golem.
are vulnerable to certain types of damage, but nothing else really is. I think it would be very interesting and also engaging to be able to find literally something's weakness, and not just because, oh, well, dealing fire to a troll means it doesn't regenerate. Like, have the fire damage do a little extra damage, and that's how they know it works. You know, like, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Like, have vampires be vulnerable to radiant damage, for crying out loud.
Why not to garlic?
Yeah, why not
Garlic damage. Create
garlic damage and introduce it to the game. And then we can have this like interesting like rock, paper, scissors aspects to it. And I think with Thomas's idea, it's like maybe only introduce this in like challenge rating creatures 10 or above or something, where once they've gotten used to the game, now we can do this thing where it's like, oh no, like you're using bludgeoning weapons. That's not really useful against a vampire. You need piercing to fight a vampire, and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure.
It is just funny to me when you say that there are player character abilities that are like, it'll help you discern this creature's weaknesses, which is going to be super helpful for the 5 creatures with weaknesses.
Yeah, exactly.
Most
the
creatures
game currently functions.
Okay, DM, what's its weaknesses? And the DM goes, it doesn't have it. Being killed.
Cool, glad I used my
Well,
action.
and that's the thing too, like more player character ways of inducing vulnerabilities I think would be very interesting. Like find ways to tactically weaken a creature in a way that you can exploit. And
it's
I
now
think
bleeding, and that means this kind of
it's
thing.
it's
The
bleeding, so that
keyword means that interacts with this other ability.
Yeah.
Haha.
yeah, so that means that slashing will do more because it will open the wound farther or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, now we're talking.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Get it, make it gross.
Well, and adding that kind of complexity at a higher level that is built off of a streamlined system that is internally functional and not contradictory allows for strategy.
Yeah.
Which is really fun.
It still allows you to be clumsy and bumbling at the early levels, which is always fun. But as you level up, the world will now become more interesting and strategic because hopefully you, the player, should be, as well as you play more and more of the game. And now you're in a level 16 party. You should be able to start strategizing about what damage type will be best, or else like what how have you been playing the game for 16 levels and not ever once thought about that?
You should be a pro ultra mega gamer by now.
Yeah, pro gamer move. All right, and before we wrap up here, Bean, do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, I mean, always more gnomes.
More gnomes, yeah.
more
A
gnomes,
couple
of
more gnome
course.
types.
Yeah.
Full monster manual, Mordenkainen's Guide to Gnomes.
More lagoons,
Of course,
more
of
playable
course.
lagoons.
More
You know,
beans,
I,
yeah.
I don't have too many big thoughts up in this brain because, of course, if you cut it open, it's just beans that
Just
fall
beans
out.
in there.
Oh, you have more than one? That's cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of small
Lucky.
brains. And, you know, of course, there's me, the one child. I've got 2 sisters, of course, Squash and Corn.
Uncle Guacamole, who we've established as canon.
I guess it's interesting for me to listen to this kind of stuff because I do very much feel like a huge participant in D&D, but some of the like logistical academic stuff, I like have knowledge of it and I'm a part of it, but very much in the same way of when I'm building a Magic the Gathering deck and I start to just read a wall of text. Like I'd have to read it 10 times to know really what it was talking about. And so, as a player, I'm a pretty good player because I can just sort of focus on, like, this is what I do. I know these things, or I can help, you know, I can rely on my DM or my other players to kind of help me remember. I'll just tell a storytelling thing, and then we'll figure out the logistics of, like, what that means. When I go to sit down to be a dungeon master, I want to be this way better dungeon master that's like planned all these interesting stories and it's not ahead. When people talk about, oh, I have to go prep my campaign, I cannot even comprehend what that is. I've tried so many times and I've read the Dungeon Master's Guide like so many times and it only kind of means something to me. Like, aspects of it are kept with me, but then when I go to take that knowledge and sit down and try to make my own, because of course we're all about homebrew here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I try to take my own knowledge and sit down and like make a homebrew world, now I'm a professional writer. I know how to write. I can build a big magical world. I can write a backstory, but like for some reason when I sit down to try to the way that the books are written, and obviously this isn't true for other people, because lots of people are very successful. Now, I've run several very successful campaigns. It's not that I haven't done that. Like, I can totally DM. That's not what I'm saying. Something about, though, these books, and the way they're done, and the way it's all set up, when I sit down and go, I'm going to prep a campaign, I don't know what to do. And so I will just get the most vaguest, farthest apart bullet points of ideas And then I will just sort of sit and improv everything. I don't even end up doing a lot of like ability checks half the time I'm DMing, because I just get so into the like back and forth storytelling. Now that's, I guess, just my style. But I don't know how to say this logistically. Like, I couldn't tell you what changes I would like to see made that would help me. But I would love if moving forward, I felt like the way the material was written and the kind of material that was written, if I felt like for myself, people who are new to D&D, because I'm not new to D&D, I've been playing it for like 8 years. But if, people who are beginners or think like me or just want to try something new, if they were able to take the things that were there and sit down with them and feel like they had an easier time coming up with their own ideas and world and campaign, like that's what I would love for myself. I could not possibly tell you how to accomplish that, because if I knew, I would just do it.
I think
that's totally fair.
I think that's totally valid, though,
That's
Bean.
very
That's
good.
like really good insight, because there's a lot of people who feel that way. I see that sentiment a lot online, where people go to the forums and they go, "Hi, I'm DMing for the first time tomorrow. What does that mean, and how do I do it?" And it's like, no, I understand like the rules of the game, but like, how do I make use of them?
What is
and
the
there's tons of
onboarding
places,
experience for new DMs? Yeah.
there's tons of places where people try to give advice, but even still, people who can give the greatest advice on it, it can still be difficult because of what you're talking about. The actual material itself, it isn't that easy to onboard. And I think there's a really good conversation to be had, a good challenge to Wizards of the Coast, to find a way to turn more players into dungeon masters, to have an on-ramp for that gives them the information they need, that gives them the confidence that they can rely on the rules and that they can weave them into their stories, and that they can kind of, I guess, trust that the books will be there to support them. Because right now I see the sentiment a lot where people say, I started DMing and then I put all the books away because it was more of a hassle to try to use them than to just keep going. And I think you're right. That's something that they need to solve if they want these books to be useful in bringing more players into the dungeon mastering space.
They need to get that gateway drug
I
to
built
DMing.
I built my own DM screen, and on the other side of it, I have like lots of bullet points and tables for like explanations of. I mean, and this
says "sexy goblin."
But I wish that I knew how to write to Wizards of the Coast and be like, hey, this is what would help me. But I just don't. I don't know what it is. But
Well, they listen to the show, so.
Of
Well,
course.
yeah, of course.
Hey,
Jeremy Crawford is in the room with us.
I don't know.
As always.
I feel like we've actually had some really great ideas, and I would encourage, like, hey, if Wizards is claiming that they're listening to all the feedback, hey, audience, send them this way. Tag Jeremy Crawford. Send them this.
Yeah.
And hey, guys, if in the new material you do use some of our ideas, I'm not saying you have to credit us, but maybe like put a code word in the book so that when we read it, we know.
Say beans.
Just
if you listen to
just
My
include
head's
us
just
in
full
some
of
of the
beans.
art in the background, kind of out of focus.
Yeah.
There are
Well,
just
you
some
know,
very
being-
angry people sitting in just the
In
back,
the back
of
the
a
tavern. Yeah.
You know, Bean, in Xanathar's, I love all the tables that they added at the back to try and like give people inspiration and sort of walk you through the process of building an interesting backstory. I think it would be really cool if in the new version of the DMG, the sort of first thing you come across is like a step-by-step set of inspiration tools to walk you through
Like-
coming up with a setting,
and
coming up with an
in a
encounter, coming
fun,
up with a
interesting
session.
way.
Yeah.
How to build a quest, how
Not
to
just like
challenge
a
a player's
slog
skill.
of
Yeah.
And that wasn't-
encyclopedias.
Yeah, that wasn't like just pages that you read and it sort of explains it, but I like the sort of tables that you move from one to the other to sort of build a randomly generated encounter. Like, what is your setting in?
I
Or,
think-
like, what kind of story are you trying to tell? And I think they actually... Didn't they add something like that with horror in one of the books that just came out?
They
Kind
did
of.
in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft.
Yeah.
They did some like how to design your own horror
Like, do you want to do
stories.
body horror? Are
Yeah.
you trying to do cosmic
Yeah.
horror? Here's some
Okay.
inspiration tools.
Or even just a proper way to read the existing modules.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
that's the
definitely.
thing. Like, Because in a lot of those they have like when the heroes enter this room, you read this paragraph aloud.
Yeah.
But then like if they want more information, the way that the modules are written, there's really not a way for you to actually give it to them.
So maybe you've got two sections
But yeah.
where it's like, so in this section we're talking about the general concept of like this DME thing. And then you've got two things where it's like, if you're reading a module, you'll probably encounter this type of stuff. Here's how you can talk about that. Here's how you can make it your own. What if your players ask this? Here's how you expand on it. Or if you're homebrewing your own world, here's how to start thinking about these things from the beginning. In our little fake campaign, this is what our in our little fake campaign, our DM Giambathy is struggling because his players just asked him, but who in this tavern looks like they know a secret? Here's how he dealt with that. Like, I don't know, something
that
like
stuff
that.
would be.
That'd be cool.
I agree. That's some really interesting stuff. I really appreciate that insight from you of your experience with DMing and how the game can hopefully in the future as it evolves appeal to you and to people who think like you better, because I think that's very important. Like the DMG works really well for how my brain works, but not everyone's brain works how my brain works. And that's really important for them to understand that they are writing these books for everybody, and not everyone approaches the game the same way.
Yeah, like right now, I couldn't tell you anything that is in the DMG, and I've read it like 6 times.
Nothing that important, don't worry. Just how to run the game. Thank you so much for listening, travelers. We want to hear your feedback. We want to hear your thoughts. Tell us in the comments below your hopes and dreams, kind of in general in life, but also for D&D and for the future editions of D&D. What do you want to see from this next evolution? Do you think we have bad ideas? Don't tell us. That would be very mean.
We'll cry.
But if you think we have good ideas, let us know.
Well, if you think we have bad ideas, tell us repeatedly, but only in Swedish.
If you think we have bad ideas, you need to comment a long comment, but you'll need to break up the comment into many little ones just to help our little algorithm boost.
Shh, you said the A word.
The best way to tell us you think our ideas are better to go to our Patreon and then sub at the highest tier, and that will let you. We don't have a Patreon. But if we did, that's what I would say. I would say if you think we're idiots, if you give us $20, we will admit we were wrong.
We admit we're wrong on this show all the time.
What you can do is subscribe so that you never miss an opportunity to tell us we're dumb and wrong.
Exactly.
Of
exactly. And so, please do that. Like the video, subscribe to the channel for future Dungeons & Dragons homebrew discussion content. If you have a homebrew you'd like us to discuss on the channel, you can send it to us at our email, thecopperfoxinn@gmail.com, or on social media @thecopperfoxinn. And that's this side quest wrapped up, and nobody even died.
Nice.
Until next time, keep on adventuring.
Safe travels.
Do you want to do that again, Thomas?
That's fine.
Did you forget if we told
I
you
think
to keep on
Thomas's
adventuring
brain was
and travel
replaced
safe?
with Dean's.
I can't
Started
help
to
but
say
notice.
travel safe, fellas.
I can't help but notice that until next time, Steve seemed to start with the letter N and L and F. Until next time.
Next time.